Picture Canterbury Cathedral on a humid July morning in the year 1220. Sunlight streams through cobalt-stained glass, casting blue pools across freshly scrubbed cane limestone. The air smells of frankincense, beeswax, and damp wool. Ahead of you sits a reliquary chest hammered from solid sheets of gold, blazing with sapphires, emeralds, and antique Roman cameos. In that single launch season, the shrine keepers of Canterbury Cathedral Priory recorded an intake of 1,073 pounds in silver pennies, dropped straight into their wooden, iron-banded collection chests. To understand what that sum actually meant in 1220, consider that a master mason cutting vault ribs on that same cathedral earned 4 silver pennies for a full day of dangerous physical labor. That single summer haul equaled more than 2 centuries of skilled artisan wages dropped onto a table in just a few months. The bone in the chest was not the miracle. The miracle was turning mortal terror into perpetual operating cash flow. To see how that cash flow worked, you have to look past the incense and crack open the private ledgers of the Benedictine monks who ran the enterprise. Our entire window into this holy cash machine comes from a surviving set of parchment documents known as the Custodes Feretri rolls, the shrine custodian accounts of Christ Church Priory. Year after year, 2 trusted monks, appointed as wardens of the martyr's shrine, sat at a desk in the cathedral triforium. They unrolled sheepskin and meticulously recorded every single silver penny, foreign groat, gold ring, and broken silver buckle lifted out of the locked collection boxes below. What those rolls reveal is not a quiet sanctuary of contemplation. It is an industrial traffic system engineered for maximum financial extraction. Canterbury Cathedral was not built simply to house a tomb. It was constructed as a one-way pilgrim funnel. When crowds arrived at the cathedral gates, monastic marshals directed them through the south porch and down the dark nave aisle. The architecture kept the crowds moving in a strict loop through 4 distinct monetized collection points. First came the crypt, where the martyr had originally been laid to rest in 1170. Pilgrims knelt before the old stone tomb and dropped their first coin into a slot monitored by a monk holding a wooden rod. Next, the crowd was funneled up a flight of stairs to the transept of the martyrdom, specifically to the altare ad punctum ensis, the altar of the point of the sword, where the 4 knights had shattered a blade against the flagstones while killing Archbishop Thomas Becket. Another iron-bound box waited there for another donation. From there, the line was pushed up the polished marble steps of the Eastern Trinity Chapel to the main event, the caput, a life-size silver-gilt bust holding the severed crown of Becket's skull, followed by the towering golden shrine chest itself. The Custodes Feretri rolls did not lump this money into one general fund. The shrine wardens tracked the intake box by box. The accounts show separate running totals for the shrine, the skull relic, the sword point, and the crypt. If one station suffered a drop in revenue, the prior knew immediately where the flow had stalled. The layout was brilliant because it eliminated transaction friction. A peasant might hesitate to hand over a full silver groat at the door, but split that cost across 4 distinct holy stations, each framed by candles and chanting monks, and the visitor would drop a penny at every single stop without ever feeling cheated. None of this revenue appeared out of thin air. Before a cathedral could collect a single penny from a saint, it had to endure a crushing phase of capital expenditure. Relics were not cheap to launch. In the decades following Becket's murder, the monks of Canterbury found themselves with a booming spiritual asset, but their old Norman choir was gutted by a catastrophic fire in 1174. To rebuild the choir and construct a shrine magnificent enough to rival Rome, the priory took on staggering levels of debt. Archbishop Stephen Langston spent nearly 2 years orchestrating the grand translation of 1220, the ceremonial event where Becket's bones were dug up from the dark crypt and elevated into the golden chest above. Langston financed an international marketing blitz. He sent messengers to every royal court in Western Europe, commissioned master goldsmiths like Walter of Colchester to craft a reliquary chest sheeted in pure gold, and rebuilt the surrounding marble arcade. For the launch weekend, Langston set up temporary conduits across Canterbury that flowed with free spiced wine for the crowds. He provided free hay for thousands of horses along the London road. The bill for the launch weekend alone exceeded £1,000. The priory was forced to borrow heavily from merchant bankers in Lucca and Florence to float the upfront expenses. It was a massive financial gamble, but Langston and the monks understood return on investment. The debt taken on to build the shrine was paid down rapidly because the launch solidified Canterbury as the premier spiritual franchise in England. Gold did not rot. Once the shrine was constructed, its physical maintenance was negligible compared to the recurring year-after-year flood of silver moving through its gates. The offering box, however, was only the top of the sales funnel. The priory's real commercial genius lay in merchandising. When a 13th century pilgrim stood before the golden shrine, they were not allowed to touch the bones. They could look, pray, and drop their coin through the metal grills. To take a piece of the miracle home, they had to buy official merchandise. The monks developed two high-margin physical products. The first was the Canterbury Ampulla, a small lead tin flask containing the water of St. Thomas. Monks claimed this liquid was infused with a microscopic dilution of Becket's own martyred blood. The second product was the lead pilgrim badge, stamped with the image of Becket's bust, his mitre, or the 4 murderous knights. Surviving stone badge molds found along the River Thames reveal the economics of this operation. Lead and tin were cheap, abundant, and easy to cast in mass quantities using 2-part stone matrices. A local artisan could cast hundreds of badges in an afternoon for a few pennies worth of base metal. The badges were sold just outside the cathedral gates, along Mercery Lane, for a halfpenny or a penny apiece. The profit margin on these badges was staggering, frequently exceeding 800% over the cost of raw metal and casting labor. For the pilgrim, the lead badge was proof of transit, a talisman against disease, and an insurance policy against bandits on the road home. For the priory of Christ Church, it was free advertising. Every pilgrim who walked back to Yorkshire, Flanders, or Bavaria with a lead badge sewn to their wool cap was a walking billboard for the Canterbury Shrine. The priory also captured the secondary economy that grew around the churchyard. Pilgrims needed food, ale, stables, and beds. The monks did not leave those profits to the free market. Christ Church Priory owned dozens of commercial tenements, inns, and brewhouses ringing the cathedral precinct. They leased these properties to Canterbury innkeepers under strict long-term contracts that guaranteed the monastery a steady cut of commercial rents, victualling fees, and milling dues. Yet raw foot traffic could only generate so much revenue. To truly scale the enterprise, the church had to financialize the afterlife. This is where the pilgrimage system hooked into the indulgence market. According to medieval Catholic doctrine, confession erased the eternal guilt of a sin, but it did not eliminate the temporal punishment. A soul still owed time in the cleansing fires of purgatory before entering heaven. Cathedrals realized they could monetize that debt. By securing papal bulls, the Archbishop of Canterbury obtained the legal authority to grant indulgences, formal remissions of purgatorial time, to anyone who visited the shrine during specific holy feast days and made a cash donation. A visit on the Feast of the Translation in July might shave 40 days off a donor's sentence in purgatory. A Jubilee year could offer a plenary indulgence, wiping out the entire temporal debt in one stroke. This triggered a profound economic chain reaction across medieval England. First, Canterbury's soaring indulgence revenue sparked fierce competition from rival cathedrals. Durham aggressively promoted the shrine of St. Cuthbert. Westminster Abbey invested heavily in the cult of King Edward the Confessor. Lincoln Cathedral poured fortunes into the shrine of Little St. Hugh. As shrines competed for the same pool of pilgrim silver, they pressured the papacy for longer and more potent indulgences. Second, the indulgence transformed purgatory into an asset class with adjustable discount rates. If a wealthy London merchant was too sick or busy to walk 60 miles to Kent, the church created legal mechanisms allowing him to pay a proxy pilgrim to make the journey on his behalf. Alternatively, he could purchase an official indulgence certificate directly from traveling monastic collectors. Third, this proliferation of paper remissions created a secondary market dominated by pardoners, mobile salesmen licensed to trade pardons for hard coin across rural parishes. The business had expanded far beyond the stone walls of the cathedral. The holy bone had been successfully converted into an abstract financial instrument traded across the kingdom. To understand the actual operating realities behind these sacred mechanics, we have to look at the numbers. The complete private accounts for every operational year of Christ Church Priory do not survive in a single intact volume. What does survive are scattered rolls from the shrine wardens, treasurers' computus rolls, municipal tax surveys, and price records from the Canterbury archives. By pulling these sources together, we can assemble a realistic financial model of a medieval cathedral shrine enterprise in mid-13th century England.
Let us start with a good year, a major jubilee year or a high summer translation feast with ideal weather and political peace across the realm. On the revenue side, offerings drop directly into the four main collection chests at the shrine, skull, sword point, and crypt, bring in £920. Sales of lead badges and ampulla through cathedral licensed stalls generate £115. Special papal indulgence certificates issued to wealthy nobles and London merchants add another £140. Rents from priory-owned pilgrimage inns, bakehouses, and horse stables around the cathedral gates yield £65. Total gross revenue for a high-traffic jubilee year reaches roughly £1,240. The operating costs to handle that volume are substantial. Pure beeswax for the hundreds of torches burning continuously around the shrine consumes £85. Security is a major expense. Hired night watchmen, armed bailiffs, and shrine guards to control the crowd cost £45. Purchasing raw lead and tin ingots for badge manufacturing takes £18. Administrative expenses, including parchment rolls, scribal labor, and legal fees paid to the ecclesiastical courts to defend shrine privileges, take £32. Routine repairs to iron grills, offering box locks, and fabric hangings require £25. Monastic feast day distributions and mandatory charity to the poor at the cathedral gate consume £60. Critically, we must account for the priory's internal labor. The labor of the two full-time shrine keepers, the sacristan, the altar priests, and the chapter monks was officially unpaid under Benedictine vows. If we assign a fair market value to their administrative, liturgical, and managerial labor based on what secular bailiffs, clerks, and chantry priests commanded at the time, that management cost equals roughly £75. Total operating expenses for a good year sum to £340. That leaves a net operating surplus of £900. In the currency of the 13th century, that single-year profit was enough to cover the daily wages of a skilled master carpenter for over 200 continuous years. Now consider an average year, a standard operating season in the late 13th century without a jubilee, marked by routine summer pilgrimage traffic. Gross offerings at the four altar boxes fall to £220. Lead badge and ampulla sales drop to £35. Routine local indulgence donations bring in £40. Precinct commercial rents hold steady at £60. Total gross revenue in an average year lands at £355. Operating expenses shrink, but fixed costs remain stubborn. Beeswax for the mandatory shrine candles takes £40. A scaled-down security staff of night guards and porters costs £18. Badge medals and workshop costs take £6. Scribes, parchment, and accounting rolls cost £12. Minor structural maintenance on the shrine chapel takes £14. Required almsgiving and bread distributions consume £25. Deducting the same standard £75 for the administrative and clerical management of the monastic staff brings the total operating cost to £190. The resulting net surplus in an average year is £165. That represents a healthy, reliable return, equal to roughly 35 years of an artisan stonemason's daily income, which the priory routinely funneled into monastic library books, stained glass windows, and buying up additional farmland in Kent.
Finally, look at a bad year. Imagine 1315, the onset of the Great Famine. Heavy rains wash out roads across southern England, livestock dies in the fields, and the harvest rots. Pilgrimage travel collapses. Gross offerings at the shrine boxes plunge to just £38. Souvenir badge sales evaporate to £5. Indulgence collections fall to £12. Impoverished innkeepers fall behind on their leases, dragging precinct rents down to £28.
Total gross revenue for a bad year crashes to £83. The fixed costs, however, cannot simply be turned off. The cathedral must keep the holy lamps burning, taking £22 in wax and tallow. Basic night security to protect the reliquary chest from starving thieves requires £15. Legal defenses and parchment rolls cost £8. Essential building upkeep takes £10. Emergency food distributions to desperate paupers gathering at the monastery gate surged to £35. Factoring in the standard £75 management and liturgical overhead pushes total operating costs to £165. In a bad year, the shrine enterprise posts a net loss of £82. That single-season deficit was large enough to consume the entire annual income of a modest rural parish manor, forcing the priory to draw down its grain reserves or take out short-term credit from Italian merchants. This volatility was the central trap of the relic industry. The shrine was an asset with enormous fixed overhead and high exposure to external shocks. To see how that volatility played out over time, consider the long-term life cycle of Canterbury's shrine revenue, from its peak to its eventual destruction. For the first 100 years after 1220, Canterbury operated as a near monopoly. The cash rolled in with astonishing regularity. The peak arrived during the 1320 Jubilee, when tens of thousands of pilgrims jammed the roads from Dover and London. The Custodes Feretri rolls recorded offerings that year exceeding £600 at the main shrine alone. Then came the turning point. In the autumn of 1348, the Black Death struck southern England. It killed roughly half the population, wiped out agricultural labor, and severely disrupted travel networks. When the initial wave of pestilence cleared, the priory found that the economics of pilgrimage had permanently shifted. The monks expected a religious revival. They thought terrified survivors would flock to Canterbury with silver to thank St. Thomas for their lives. The ledgers show the exact opposite. While offerings spiked briefly in the immediate wake of the plague, they quickly settled into a permanent multi-decade downward slide. The surviving Custodes Feretri accounts from the 15th century tell a story of inexorable decay. By the 1470s, annual offerings at the shrine had dropped below £100. By the 1520s, they rarely topped £30 a year. What caused the collapse? First, the proliferation of competing shrines had fractured the market. English pilgrims no longer had to walk all the way to Kent to purchase purgatorial relief. Local parish guilds had established their own altars, securing regional indulgences from visiting bishops. Second, the intellectual climate had cooled. Humanist critics like Desiderius Erasmus visited Canterbury in the early 1500s and published scathing accounts of the monks displaying rusty sword points, kissing dirty rags used by the saint, and aggressive collection boxes placed at every turn. The public had grown skeptical of the holy machinery. The final act arrived in September 1338. King Henry VIII, having broken with Rome and declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, sent royal commissioners to Canterbury. They did not merely close the church, they launched a total state expropriation. The commissioners dismantled the golden shrine of St. Thomas piece by piece. Becket was officially declared a traitor to the crown. His name was struck from prayer books and his bones were burned and scattered. Royal inventory clerks weighed the spoils. They packed the gold plating, the loose rubies, the sapphires, and the silver plate into 26 heavy wooden carts and hauled them directly to the Tower of London to be melted into royal bullion. In a single week, 3.5 centuries of accumulated pilgrim capital was absorbed into the royal treasury. The Canterbury case study proves an iron law of historical economics. A business built entirely on a state-enforced spiritual monopoly looks invincible while the legal framework holds. But the moment political power redefines the underlying asset, the entire revenue architecture vanishes overnight. Yet while the monks saw their shrine broken by royal carts, we must ask the deeper question: who actually built lasting family fortunes out of the pilgrimage boom? The monks did not keep the money personally. Benedictine vows meant the revenue was absorbed into the corporate body of Christ Church Priory, spent on grand vaults, liturgical vestments, and legal fees. The individuals who captured the most durable wealth from the holy enterprise were the secular merchants operating right outside the churchyard wall. Consider a real, documented citizen of 13th century Canterbury named Thomas Chiche. Chiche was not a monk, and he did not cast lead badges. He was a local burgess, property investor, and city bailiff. While the cathedral priory was busy managing the spiritual experience inside the gates, Chiche recognized that the thousands of pilgrims arriving on the London road needed immediate physical services long before they reached the altar steps. Chiche systematically bought up prime urban real estate along the main pilgrimage approaches in Canterbury, particularly along Burgate and the High Street. He established inns, leased taverns, operated grain mills, and gained control of the town's licensed victualling supplies. When pilgrims arrived exhausted and thirsty, Chiche's inns extracted their cash for ale, bread, stable space, and bed hire. He took the liquid silver generated by the cathedral's spiritual monopoly and converted it into something permanent: freehold land, water mills, and stone tenements across the county of Kent. The Chiche family did not depend on the popularity of Beckett's bones to survive a bad harvest. They held the deeds to productive agricultural acreage and prime commercial street fronts. Thomas Chiche used its real estate wealth to dominate Canterbury's civic administration, serving as the town's bailiff and laying the groundwork for a family dynasty that would send members to Parliament and hold high county office for generations. He never had to buy an indulgence, cast a lead badge, or guard a golden chest at midnight. He simply taxed the friction generated by the holy machine. When we look back at the medieval relic business, the sheer scale of the operation can be disorienting. It is easy to view Canterbury Cathedral through modern eyes as either a pure house of devout prayer or a cynical exercise in spiritual fraud. The surviving parchment of the Custodes Feretri rolls tells us that it was neither. It was a complex, highly capitalized corporate enterprise, navigating severe volatility, heavy fixed overhead, and changing consumer psychology. The cathedral was a liquidity engine. The lead badges were mass-market merchandise. Indulgences were secondary financial paper, and the golden shrine was the physical anchor holding a massive urban economy together. The bone in the chest was not the miracle. The miracle was turning mortal terror into perpetual operating cash flow.